I haven't given up on liberal democracy. I don't have an alternative political project. If anything, I'm just turning to mysticism and personal work for, comfort and some kind of ground of being, something to stand on, something to provide a health and sanity. But I'm not optimistic about liberal democracy. I feel like it was a walled garden, but the walls have been knocked over and strange beasts are starting to walk through here. None have yet made this their home, but I'm going to say a couple of things about it, and I know this is hard, and I'm probably going to wobble because of the intensity of the subject and the inflammatoriness of the discourse. But I actually think the biggest problem and our worst mistake, and it's really America's mistake, this gets worse and worse after World War II, the American alliance, which Australia is part of. It's our foreign policy. We simply don't respect freedom of speech and freedom of movement and freedom of association in our foreign policy like we do at home. And this is not missed. And it's missed least of all by the elites and the rulers of the countries that we want to persuade or influence, right? They don't hear our leaders and NGOs and activists talking about freedom and democracy and human rights and liberalism and just naturally relax and think, oh, everything's going to be cool. They just want to bring light and order and happiness to our society. No, they quite legitimately hear, well, it just seems to them like a Trojan horse for imperialist ambition, right? Straight up, this is the way it is. So what you have is a society that tends to see itself one way through these sacred values, and it might project that vision of itself outwards, but most of the world can see what we are by our actions. And the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan were especially egregious. I mean, the war crimes of the centuries, if we're honest. So liberal democracy is covered in mud today, and I'm certainly not claiming that foreign policy is the problem. The problem is more modernity itself, I guess, in terms of liberal democracy and its threats. It's the level of atomization and alienation, and there is this tension in diversity, I suppose, the lack of shared values. But I really think probably it's actually more our unreasonableness, which is all those problems are serious, these modern problems, but it's actually, if we weren't losing our capacity to reason somehow, we could overcome this, right? But the reason I'm naming foreign policy here in this video is that the foreign enemy becomes the greatest stressor of all these other problems, right? And it was fine. In a sense, we could pretend this didn't matter while America was the only superpower. But as America clearly declines and China obviously rises, it matters. And, our strategy of using liberal democracy in a kind of info war, in a PR international info war behind a lot of nakedly aggressive wars that really weren't about that, that has made our enemies much more terrible than they would have been. And so they're explicitly more hostile. And that just radiates into our society, into more hysteria. The national security state gets more power. And post-COVID, I feel really bleak. I feel like China is spiritually ruling the world at this point. I mean, that's kind of probably what broke me. Like, if I sort of get away from the analysis and just like confess my own perspective, it's I never had a naive view of American, like, when George Bush invaded Iraq, talking about freedom, it was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. Like, it's just, like, I didn't buy that for a second. But there was something legitimate. Like, there was something about liberal democracies that, like I felt like, yes, this is better. And I still feel that, but I just feel like now I'm like, well, since COVID, it's like the American vision of a great future of freedom and independence just doesn't seem very credible when I look at the Chinese vision of, like, the state comes before all and safety before freedom, right? Like, because whatever the West says, in practice, we seem more influenced by the Chinese model. And all these things together have really shaken my faith in liberalism. I just don't know. I should return, I suppose, to the garden analogy, because I'm getting a bit loose now. And that analogy is a good one, because I think the walls are gone. And I think the garden is still here. And I think the argument is over what the walls were and how badly damaged are they. And also, what are the beasts? What is actually a beast and what isn't a beast? It's an interesting problem of, like, what do you even put in a garden? It's like, and I guess I'm getting to this sort of, I've made my point, and now I don't really know how to end it, because I'm bringing a bit more discipline to this video, but by nature I'm pretty chaotic, I guess. And I guess to confess, my problem is, why I want to be careful, why I welcome feedback here from anyone, is that I genuinely don't know. I'm really distrustful of liberalism at this point. Partly, I think maybe we got too complacent about, like, we just didn't give evil its due. We didn't give the necessity of evil, the necessity of limits and boundaries and authority. Some level we didn't give it its due, and so our liberalism corrupted, But I can't tell, because I corrupted, right? Like, I'm ashamed of how I live my life. Like, I'm in a process of recovery right now. And I grew up in a really liberal, creative, artistic background with a lot of love, but I didn't get much conservative or right-wing wisdom. Right? And it's not that I think left-wing wisdom is poison or liberalism is poison. And classical liberalism isn't just left-wing. It's really complex. These discussions are difficult. But all the mistakes I made in my personal life, like in terms of self-discipline, morally speaking, just straight up like foolishness, I used liberal values. Like, I abused liberal values to make my stupidest decisions. It's why I've been so curious recently about the right and conservatives, because it was like I spent so long soaking in the wisdom of the left, it was like I needed to soak in some opposite wisdom. I can't be of either. I can't identify with either of these groups. But I just feel like we're in a society that's like a bird trying to cut its wings off. It's like, oh, we just need one wing, just the left wing, just the right wing. And it's like, that's not liberalism. Liberalism was some attempt to integrate that. And I feel like the death of liberalism is like one now is just trying to conquer the other. And it's like, it's just insanity. And I can't separate things out. I can't separate our insanity from China's. I can't separate mine from history's. So I'll end now. I can feel myself losing my breath again. I started out so calm. But this is why this stuff is so hard to talk about. I mean, even if you want to talk about the apocalypse, and in effect this is what we're kind of talking about, most people don't. And if you're going to talk about the apocalypse, you need to do it very obliquely and with incredible peace. You need real peace in your heart. You need stillness. You need humility. And I have a bit of that, but have enough pain inside that it's hard for me to talk about and not start to, for one pain to contaminate the other and for my voice and breath to get away from me.